Alaska's capital city is facing an unprecedented crisis that has officials declaring a state of disaster before the catastrophe has even begun. Juneau is bracing for what could be the most devastating glacial lake outburst flood in its recorded history.
Breaking news, Alaska faces imminent disaster as a glacier lake outburst threatens Juneau with catastrophic flooding. Alaska Governor Dunleavy issued a disaster declaration after monitoring signals and imminent release from Suicide Basin, a side of Mendenhall Glacier. The volume of water has hit record levels and a flood could strike any moment, possibly affecting nearby neighborhoods and the river systems. Last year's GLOF caused massive damage, ripping homes apart and flooding entire communities. Despite flood control barriers, the risk remains high. Experts warn the threat is real and time is running out. Will this be Juneau's worst flood yet?
And the countdown has already started. This isn't just another weather event, it's a climate-driven disaster that experts say could reshape the landscape in a matter of hours. As we speak, millions of gallons of water are trapped behind an ice dam that's about to give way, threatening to unleash destruction on a scale that has emergency managers scrambling to prepare for the worst. The question isn't if this disaster will strike, it's when and how catastrophic it will be. To understand what's happening in Juneau right now, we need to look at the unique geography that makes this situation so dangerous. The Mendenhall Glacier, one of Alaska's most famous ice formations, stretches across a massive valley just north of the state capital. But it's not the main glacier that poses the immediate threat. It's a smaller feature called Suicide Basin, a side valley that has become ground zero for an annual disaster that's getting worse each year. Suicide Basin sits above the Mendenhall Glacier like a giant bathtub, collecting meltwater throughout the summer months. The Mendenhall Glacier itself acts as a natural dam, holding back enormous volumes of water that accumulate in this depression. When that ice dam fails, the results are catastrophic. What makes this year different is the sheer scale of the threat. Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy took the unprecedented step of issuing a disaster declaration on Sunday, August 11th, before the flood has even occurred. This proactive approach reflects just how serious the situation has become. The declaration came after joint local disaster declarations by the city and borough of Juneau and the Central Council of the Tlingit and Haida Indian tribes of Alaska. Officials are no longer waiting.
We are partnering with the Red Cross to set up an emergency evacuation shelter at Floyd Dryden Gymnasium. Again, we just really encourage everybody to sign up for emergency alerts. As we've heard from the National Weather Service, these events can become dynamic, and as we receive updated information, we'll be pushing those out through our Alert Sense opt-in app. Our number one priority for this response is the protection of life and safety.
Governor Mike Dunleavy issued a state disaster declaration yesterday.
They're preparing for the worst-case scenario based on what monitoring equipment is telling them about conditions in Suicide Basin. The science behind what's happening is both fascinating and terrifying. Throughout the summer, snowmelt, rainfall, and glacial meltwater flow into Suicide Basin, gradually filling what scientists call a glacier-dammed lake. The National Weather Service and U.S. Geological Survey have been monitoring this process with sophisticated equipment, including web cameras and laser gauges that track water and ice levels in real time. What they're seeing now has them deeply concerned. The volume of water currently trapped in Suicide Basin has reached or exceeded levels observed during previous flood of record events. But this time, there's even more water and the potential for an even more devastating release. On Sunday, August 10th, monitoring equipment detected the critical moment that emergency managers had been dreading. Suicide Basin began overtopping. This means the accumulated water has reached the point where it's spilling over the top of the ice dam, with icebergs being pulled toward the overflow channel. Historically, once this overtopping begins, it takes anywhere from a few hours to 6 days for the catastrophic release to occur. The slow lowering of water levels that sensors are detecting indicates the basin is at absolute full capacity, setting the stage for what could be the most destructive glacial outburst flood in Alaska's recorded history. The immediate threat to Juneau is enormous. The Mendenhall River, which flows through the city's most populated neighborhoods, is expected to experience flooding that will likely affect the entire Mendenhall Valley. This isn't just a minor inconvenience. We're talking about a wall of water that could reach record heights, potentially exceeding the devastating floods of 2023 and 2024. Early forecasts suggest the river could crest at around 16.6 feet, which would shatter previous records. To put this in perspective, normal river levels are typically around 3 to 4 feet. We're looking at a flood that could be 4 times higher than normal conditions. The human impact of previous glacial outburst floods provides a sobering preview of what Juneau residents are facing. Last year's flood affected over 300 homes, caused widespread damage to public infrastructure and utilities, and resulted in both state and federal disaster declarations. Video footage from recent years shows the terrifying power of these floods. Towering trees behind homes falling into the rushing Mendenhall River as the water eats away at riverbanks, and entire houses teetering at the edge before collapsing into the torrent. The 2024 event alone released an estimated 14.6 billion gallons of water, enough to fill more than 22,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. What makes this situation particularly challenging is the speed at which everything can change. Unlike typical river flooding that develops over days or weeks, glacial outburst floods can transform from a manageable situation to a full-scale disaster in a matter of hours. Once the ice dam fails completely, the entire contents of Suicide Basin can drain in a single, catastrophic release that lasts several days. The water doesn't just flow or bend, it surges downstream with incredible force, carrying debris, ice chunks, and anything else in its path. Juneau officials have learned from previous disasters and are taking unprecedented steps to protect their community. The city has installed more than 2 miles of military-grade HESCO flood barriers along the Mendenhall River. These barriers, recommended by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, represent a temporary but crucial line of defense against the incoming floodwaters. City Manager Katie Kuster emphasized that this year is different, saying that they're not just responding to a disaster, they're ready for it. The barriers are designed to channel floodwaters and protect critical infrastructure, though officials acknowledge they're planning for every SC scenario, including the possibility that even these defenses might not be enough. The emergency response is unlike anything Juneau has seen before. Alaska's State Emergency Operations Center has been activated to coordinate interagency efforts, including emergency permitting, public messaging, and preparations for protective actions. Emergency alerts have been sent to all cell phones in the Juneau area via the wireless emergency alert system, and printed evacuation notices are being distributed to homes within the 17-foot inundation zone. An emergency evacuation shelter has been established at Floyd Dryden Middle School, and residents in flood-prone areas are being advised to prepare for immediate evacuation. The Red Cross has partnered with local authorities to ensure adequate shelter capacity, and a flood information hotline has been established to keep residents informed of the rapidly evolving situation. The broader implications of what's happening in Juneau extend far beyond this single event. These glacial outburst floods are a direct consequence of climate change, and they're becoming more frequent and more severe. Alaska has warmed twice as fast as the rest of the United States over the last several decades, with average annual temperatures rising 3.1 degrees Fahrenheit over the past century. This warming is causing glaciers to retreat at unprecedented rates, creating the conditions that make these catastrophic floods possible. Scientists are clear that without climate change, the repeated glacial outburst floods at Mendenhall Glacier simply wouldn't be happening. The retreat of the Mendenhall Glacier over the past 2 decades is considered the direct cause of these increasingly dangerous outburst floods. As the glacier shrinks, it creates larger spaces for water to accumulate, and the ice dams become less stable. What used to be partial releases that occurred gradually throughout the summer have now become full-scale drainage events that empty the entire basin at once. This pattern of complete drainage followed by rapid refilling has created an annual cycle of disaster that experts believe will continue for the next 20 to 30 years as the glacier continues to retreat. The scientific monitoring of this disaster represents a crucial advancement in our ability to predict and prepare for climate-related catastrophes. The U.S. Geological Survey Alaska Science Center is working with multiple agencies to provide real-time warning of the impending flood. They've installed satellite cameras and laser measurement systems in Suicide Basin, along with temperature and water elevation sensors in Mendenhall Lake that update every 15 minutes. This monitoring network allows forecasters to track the progression of the flood from its source all the way downstream, providing critical information for emergency managers and residents. One of the most concerning aspects of the current situation is the unpredictability of exactly when the catastrophic release will occur. While scientists can monitor water levels and detect when overtopping begins, the actual triggering mechanism for the ice dam failure remains somewhat mysterious. The buoyancy of ice and hydrostatic pressure affect the release in ways that are difficult to predict because researchers can see what's happening underneath the glacier. As one hydrologist explained, they're using past events to understand what might happen in the future, but each year brings new variables and unprecedented conditions. The economic impact of these recurring floods is staggering. The 2024 event alone caused millions of dollars in damage to homes, businesses, and public infrastructure. Roads were washed out, utilities were disrupted, and entire neighborhoods were left uninhabitable for weeks. The cost of the flood barriers, emergency response, and disaster recovery continues to mount, placing an enormous burden on local and state resources. For a city the size of Juneau, with a population of around 32,000, these repeated disasters represent an existential challenge to the community's long-term viability. Looking ahead, the situation in Juneau serves as a preview of what many other communities around the world might face as climate change accelerates. There are 120 documented ice-dammed lakes in Alaska alone, and 106 of them have drained since 1985. As temperatures continue to rise and glaciers continue to retreat, the potential for similar catastrophic floods increases. The lessons being learned in Juneau about early warning systems, flood barriers, and emergency response could prove crucial for other communities facing similar threats. The human stories behind this disaster are both heartbreaking and inspiring. Residents like Danielle Lindoff, who escaped through her front window with her cats during last year's flood, represent the resilience of a community that refuses to be defeated by recurring catastrophe. These families have watched their neighborhoods transform from safe suburban areas into annual flood zones, yet many choose to stay and fight for their community. Their experiences highlight the personal cost of climate change and the difficult decisions that millions of people around the world will face in the coming decades. As we monitor this developing situation, the broader implications become clear. What's happening in Juneau isn't just a local disaster, it's a preview of our climate future. The combination of rising temperatures, retreating glaciers, and extreme weather events is creating new types of disasters that communities around the world will need to prepare for. The proactive approach that Juneau is taking, with early warning systems and preemptive disaster declarations, may become the new normal for communities facing climate-related threats. The countdown continues in Juneau as residents brace for what could be the most devastating glacial outburst flood in the city's history. Emergency managers are watching monitoring equipment around the clock, ready to issue final evacuation orders when the ice dam finally fails. The HESCO barriers stand ready, emergency shelters are prepared, and the entire community is holding its breath, waiting for a disaster that could reshape their landscape in a matter of hours. This is climate change in action. Not some distant threat, but an immediate crisis that's about to unfold in real time. The question that remains is whether all the preparation will be enough to protect a community that's learning to live with the new reality of our changing climate.